Hi friends, welcome to Book Talk. Our title for today is The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy. Now Thomas Hardy, I get to feel with respect to this particular title, had read Mahabharat earlier, and our film directors of late 70s must have read this particular story. And you will find the similarities that I'm talking of when I go through or as I go through this particular story. Now, the story dates back to 19th century when it had not reached beyond 1/3 of its span. So one can say that it was somewhere in the early 19th century when this particular story was written. Now it is about a person whose name is Michael Hencher. He is about 21 years of age, and he goes to a county fair in Casterbridge, in a fictional county of Wessex. And this particular person, Michael Hencher, is basically a hairdresser, and a hairdresser is a person who makes bundles of hay, and he there in this fair argues with his wife Susan. Now he drinks rum-laced furmity, and he gets intoxicated, and he argues and he misbehaves with his wife Susan, and in that fit he auctions his wife and his baby daughter, whose name is Elizabeth Jane, to a passing sailor for 5 guineas. Now that is why I have said that it reminds you of that particular episode of Mahabharat. Now, after this fit in which he auctions his wife and daughter, Hencher comes back in the morning when he sobers down, and when the influence of liquor is not there, but by then it's too late, and he finds that the sailor, whose name is Richard Newson, he has gone away with his wife and with his small baby child. So Hencher is quite disheartened, and he takes a pledge that he is not going to drink for as many years as he has lived till now. So he has lived for 21 years. For the next 21 years, he is not going to drink anymore. And then in some 18 years, he works hard and he becomes a successful grain merchant, and also the mayor of this town called Casterbridge. And during the course of his life, he avoids discussing his wife Susan, and he tries to give a very staunch sobriety about his personality, and so that people think that he is a widower and he did not do anything wrong with his wife, and so he maintains that kind of an impression. Then once he visits a place called Jersey on business, where he befriends a lady by the name of Lucietta Ellie Sawyer. Now Lucietta Ellie Sawyer is the person who nurses him when this guy Hencher falls sick, and she brings him back to normalcy, and in the process they build up a relationship, and where Hencher tells Lucietta that he was once upon a time married, but most probably his wife is dead and he doesn't know, or she might even return. But with the proximity between Lucietta and Hencher, they develop a kind of a relationship, and and that besorts into thinking of getting married also. And thereafter, Hencher returns to Casterbridge, leaving Lucietta to face the social consequences, and and he gets on with his life. So after the fling, Hencher expects that Lucietta will rejoin the polite society and manage herself, and Lucietta in turn thinks that she needs to marry Hencher to get on with the society norms. So all this is going on there. And in particular way, Hencher is quite serious about getting married to Lucietta, and just then when he is about to send for her, there is a twist in the story, and Susan, who had gone out of his life, suddenly appears with her daughter, who is now grown up, and her name is Elizabeth Jane. So Susan is returning to the scene along with Elizabeth Jane. Now, Hencher is shocked to see Susan. Now, Susan had to return because her husband, Newson, who was a sailor, goes missing, and then she realizes that she doesn't have any income, and she doesn't know who's going to look after her. So she returns to Hencher, and all this while Susan thinks that her marriage with Newson was right. When suddenly now she also starts thinking that technically she was also married to Hencher, so there is no sin in getting back to Hencher. And just as Susan and Elizabeth Jane enter Hencher's life, there is another person by the name of Donald Farfree. Now he is basically on his way to America, and he is quite a cutting edge expert on agriculture, and he suddenly appears in front of Hencher and starts advising him on various issues about grain trading and agriculture, and that impresses this chap Hencher, and he thinks of employing him, and he does employ him as his grain merchant, and he gets so aggressive about this particular person, Farfree, that he removes one of his employees whom he had recently appointed. His name is Job, and he was appointed as a grain merchant. So he sacks that guy and gets in Farfree. And that of course speaks of his business genius, because no matter how hardworking Hencher was, he was not a very qualified kind of a person. So where this particular person, Farfree, helps him in doing business. Now meanwhile, Hencher, to preserve appearances, also gets Susan a house very close to his house, and he starts courting her, and even remarries her, so that the public around, the gentry around, the civilized, the society around doesn't cast any aspersions on Hencher and Susan. And but Susan is very particular. She doesn't communicate anything about their earlier affair, about her earlier marriage with Hencher to Elizabeth Jane, her daughter. And Hencher also keeps Lucetta a secret in front of Susan, and he writes to Lucetta that their marriage is off, because, and he doesn't cite any reason, but since Susan is around and he remarries her, and he just writes to her that our marriage that we had planned is off. Life goes on, but gradually Hencher's relationship with Farfree starts deteriorating, and eventually they part company. But the whole thing develops into a kind of an animosity, but it is not so much from Farfree's side as it is from Hencher's side. So it is a kind of a one-sided animosity, and but there Farfree is very particular and very meticulous about his business, but Hencher, on the other hand, starts taking aggressive ill-planned financial decisions, on account of which his business starts dwindling. It starts going down, and he starts incurring losses. Now, since Susan and Elizabeth Jane are here, Fairfree tries to build up a relationship, and he wants to marry Elizabeth Jane. Hencher is he's quite against this particular wedding, because for him Farfree is a kind of an enemy. So he tries to stop that particular wedding, and until the time when he receives a letter from Susan. Now Susan suddenly falls sick, and she's on the deathbed, and then she discloses to Hencher that this particular Elizabeth Jane is not your daughter. She happens to be the daughter of Newson, and your daughter, whom I had carried away when I left, had died in infancy. So the real daughter of Hencher had died during infancy, but the second daughter of Susan, she had kept the name as the first daughter only, that is Elizabeth Jane. So after this, hearing this, after reading this particular letter, Hencher gets a little cool in his mind, and he doesn't bother about Elizabeth Jane's future, but he also doesn't disclose that this is the reality, and he, on the contrary, doesn't oppose the marriage, but gets very cold and cruel with Elizabeth Jane. In the meantime, Lucetta gets a fortune from some of her rich relatives, and she immediately takes that money and comes to Casterbridge and buys a house. And she wants to be in close proximity of Hencher. Now, she wants to resume her relationship with Hencher, but there is a certain amount of propriety that needs to be maintained in the society. So what she does is she employs Elizabeth Jane as a companion in her household, so that there is an excuse for Hencher to visit her at times. And one day what happens is Farfree visits Lucetta. Not Lucetta. He tries to visit Elizabeth Jane, and he goes to that house, and where he finds Lucetta and meets Lucetta as her employer, and then Farfree falls in love with Lucetta, and gradually they desire to get married. Now, during this process, when they are going around, Lucetta comes to know that this particular person, Hencher, in whose love she has come to this place and bought a house, had a wife whom he had sold off, and he also had a daughter. So she gets a kind of a repulse from Hencher. So, and meanwhile she gets attracted towards Farfree, and this particular affair with Farfree gets a little too aggressive on the faster mode, and they think of getting married. But in the meantime, Hencher is not doing well financially. So he's got a lot of these debtors coming up and asking for money. So he suddenly decides, even when he doesn't like Lucetta so much, that he should marry this rich lady. She's got money now, and if that happens, the creditors will give him time to pay the money, and they will give him some more money for doing business. So all this happens, but suddenly one day Lucetta and Farfree, they run away from their house on a weekend, and they go and get married, and and they come back. Meanwhile, they don't disclose this to Hencher, and Hencher tries to still persuade Lucetta to get married to him, but she refuses, and suddenly Hencher's business goes down, and he is forced to liquidate his possessions in order to pay to his creditors. So with this calamity on Hencher's head, Farfree buys his business, and he also still regards him as a friend and an old mentor, and he employs him as a journeyman in his company, and even when he's warned by some people in the town that don't employ Hencher because he's actually your enemy, and the advisors were the town council and even Elizabeth Jane. But still, as a friend, he employs him. So Lucetta keeps her former relationship with Hencher as a secret and doesn't tell Farfree anything about that. And but one day what happens is Hencher's enemy, Job, whom he had kicked out of the job, he hands over certain letters, love letters of Lucetta, and this guy, he goes and distributes this letter and leaks it to the public that there was an affair, illegitimate affair between Lucetta and Hencher, and so after that there is a lot of bad mouthing about these two people, and the town people publicly shame Hencher and Lucetta, and they even take them for a Skimmington ride. But Lucetta by now is too frustrated, and she one day dies of epileptic seizure. So now both Susan and Lucetta are no more in life, and Hencher realizes in life that he has lost a lot. He couldn't do anything much in life, and because of his own mistakes, he has ruined his own life. And this is when Newson, if you remember, is Elizabeth's biological father. He was the sailor who had taken Susan with him. So he returns, but Hencher does not disclose about Elizabeth Jane, and he tells Newson that your daughter Elizabeth Jane is no more. She died, and so has Susan, and so it's a bad trip for you in life as well. And then Hencher realizes that he has completed about 21 years, and his promise of not drinking gets over, because when he had promised, he was 21 years old, and after that another 21 years have passed. So he gets into his drinking habit once again. But in the meanwhile, Elizabeth Jane, she marries Donald Farfree. So Elizabeth Jane and Donald Farfree, they get married. Elizabeth also discovers her father, that is Newson, and the family is finally united. But the tragedy of this particular book is that one day, when Elizabeth thinks of giving a pardon to Hencher, she goes to meet him in a particular village in some remote corner, and where there is this particular servant, Whittle. They see him on the road and they follow him, and when they see Whittle entering into a very dingy, very dilapidated kind of a small room, and along with Elizabeth, even Farfree is there, and they both enter the room where Whittle is there, and then they ask Whittle about Hencher, and Whittle says that Sir has gone away, and Elizabeth tries to ask again, what do you mean by gone away? Then Whittle says, he has died, he just now expired some half an hour back, and that's his body. And above his body, there is a particular piece of paper which Whittle cannot read, so he can't make out as to what is written. But that actually happens to be Hancher's will. So he had written a will about his death, and that he had stuck up on the top of his bed, and that read as follows: Elizabeth Jane Farfree should not be told about his death, nor should she mourn about his death, and I should not be buried in any consecrated place or ground, and no sexton should be asked to toll the bell. Nobody should remember me. Nobody should follow my funeral. There are no flowers that should be put on my grave. So these were the points that he had mentioned, and Elizabeth, on reading this, was extremely sad, but she couldn't have done much about it. And of course, Hencher had realized that his life was a complete failure, and he could not do anything in life, and he could not be with his family, he could not be with his wife, he could not be with his daughter, and just because of a particular mistake that he had committed when he was very young. So friends, this book will remind you about Mahabharat, what had happened in Kuru Sabha, and of course it does give a glimpse of Bollywood movies, some Bollywood movies that came out in 1970s. And the book is very well written, and Thomas Hardy has described each and everything in great detail, and you will go sick of the details. He's provided extremely, and it takes you back in that period of time, what England used to be. So friends, if you've liked this particular story, kindly share it, kindly also subscribe to our channel, and soon we'll be coming out with another title for you. Till then, goodbye.